ITSA works on the clear identification of cryptographic tokens. I'm joined by Philipp Sandner, chairman of ITSA. Philipp, why is identification so important for the token markets?
Well, identification is very important for tokens. For example, there are multiple tokens out there which have the same symbol. For example, BAT stands for Basic Attention Token, but it also stands for the so-called BAT coin, a very small project. So you see here, if you write BAT, but in some kind of contract, for example, a purchase contracts of tokens, then it's not entirely clear what token we actually mean. And even more so, once, for example, forks are occurring, this is happening here and there in Bitcoin, for example, but it also has happened in Ethereum, and it's also potentially feasible that it will happen in the future again. Then we have tokens on the chain forks, and then suddenly we have every token doubled, right? And the question is then, what token are we talking about? For example, if I'm selling you, Stefan, 100 tokens of this and that type, what token exactly are we talking about? This needs to be identified, and therefore token identification will be key in the future. In my personal opinion, it is as important as identifying people, identifying companies, identifying machines. That's the entire huge topic around identity management. And the same, of course, is true for identifying tokens.
So you have talked about two problems with cryptographic tokens or identification of tokens already. First, that the identifiers that were used in the past are just not good enough. The three symbols won't suffice. And then, which is more interesting, I guess, is what you talked about when you said the forks. Blockchain technology means that Bitcoin, for example, can exist in various states, and whenever there is a fork, how is it possible to assign a clear and unique identifier to all the crypto forks, Bitcoin forks out there?
Yeah, exactly. So with ITSA, I had the idea that we have a so-called ITIN, that's an International Token Identification Number, as we call it, and this token can be assigned to any token out there. So Bitcoin, for example, Ethereum, then BAT, all these tokens have one assigned ITIN number, which we created, and this stays like this, right? We have now assigned a couple of 100 tokens to as identification numbers to tokens, and we are doing even more identifications every week. Also needs to have theoretical and technical underpinning. And here we have developed a so-called UTL framework. This is called the Uniform Token Locator. It's basically similarly done like the URL, which we are knowing since 20 years from the internet. So the question is how to identify any token out there, fork resilient, global, across countries, across chains, even though that forks are occurring, how to really identify a token. And this is done by the UTL, which is starting from the genesis hash of a chain, and then includes also the smart contract address, for example, in the case of Ethereum, and it includes a so-called recent hash, because the hash is helping identify on which chain you are wanting to identify a token, on which chain you are working. And once you have a fork, then these chains are splitting, then different recent hashes are being computed, and therefore the recent hash is part of the so-called UTL framework to help identify token. And the question then is how to link the ITIN number, that's basically a 9-digit number, which can also easily memorize. It can also be easily written into contracts, and how this ITIN number can be linked to the UTL in case of forks are occurring. That's exactly what ITSA is working on. We are already live with this solution. We have the ITIN, we have the UTL ready, and we are currently assigning these identification numbers to tokens such that other people can work on this. ITSA is a non-profit association. I think this is important to note, and therefore our goal as a non-profit association is to help with these identifications of tokens.
Very interesting. Maybe you can go into further detail. When would an item be used and when the UTL? And what I found really helpful there was your example when you talked about the URL and bit.ly. Maybe you can go into a little more detail there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So to really compare and understand it. So in the traditional internet, which we are knowing, we have the so-called URL. That's www.something.com, right? That's basically the URL. And sometimes these URLs are getting very, very long in case you have pages, deep links, special pages. Say a blog, for example. A blog has the top level domain, that's www, and so on. And then there are multiple directories coming and a page and so on. So it's a very, very long URL. Everybody noticed from the browser window, right? But in this world, we also have created so-called shorteners. So these shorteners are there to basically shorten down long URLs to very short memorizable mini URLs. These are called shorteners, right? And these shortened URLs can, for example, be used with Twitter in the world as we know it today, because then you can reference URLs even though a tweet only has a specific number of characters, right? So therefore, it makes sense to have, of course, long-range URLs for long structured internet pages, and you have the shortened versions to be used, for example, in tweets and elsewhere. And we are using exactly the same method and the same comparison in the case of what we have done with the UTL on behalf of the ITSA. We have created the UTL basically as the long identification form of a token, and then basically think of this kind of shortener which we are using, the shortened version of this long token identification form UTL. The short version is the so-called ITIN, which is just having 9 characters, right? And we need both, you know, to have like the very precise identification across chain, globally, across forks, and so on of tokens. You have to have a framework such as UTL, and then to also use identification or identifiers in contracts, for example. And when you and I are doing a contract, then we need to exactly define what we are talking about. Then we would more easily write there the so-called ITIN, because this just has 9 characters, and it would be very easy to refer to this token via the ITIN, for example, in a legal contract.
Okay, so what we can sum up, UTL and ITIN are tools for clear identification and also communication along the financial markets. What is ITSA currently working on as well? What are the next steps here?
I think we are working on what needs to be emphasized here is we are working on a database where all tokens are included. The tokens are classified according to multiple categories. Then we have market data in this database such that people can easily do statistics. For example, what is the market share of Bitcoin today? You know, with our database, this is just a couple of clicks, and then you know what is the market share of Bitcoin or of Ethereum and Bitcoin, or how large is the Ethereum ecosystem. That's basically Ethereum as a base platform plus all ERC20 tokens on top of it. How large is this? Is it 50% or 40% of the market? All these, and how did it develop over time? These questions can easily be answered with our so-called token base, which inevitably needs identified tokens to work. Therefore, we first start with token identification and then continue with the token base as a general database for doing, for example, analysis, research, statistics, and so on, with tokens, their market capitalization, and their classifications, and so on.
Okay, so we can say the 3 projects or tools ITSA is working on: first the International Token Identification Number, then the International Token Classification Framework, and at last the International Token Base. They all come together in the end with a clear identification of tokens, qualitative data in form of the classification, and then market data from our partners as well.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Makes sense.
Then, Philipp, thank you very much for the interview. For all the viewers, we will also link another video explaining the UTL in more detail and an article, so you can find out more about that. And thank you very much.